All right, now see if I can properly introduce this, because I have certain factors that I need to explain as we dive in. And my clicker is not working to start out, which makes for, the limp version of this to start out. And I can't even show you what's on the screen. What? That isn't the starter screen, is it? Oh, there we go. There we go. The End of Orville Wright. Now, I don't know if you guys know who Orville Wright is. So I'm doing a series during the week in my Daily Thunder series, which is a different podcast than my sermon podcast. And my series title is Spiritual Lessons from the Wright Brothers. And I've done 2 episodes so far, and it is a very exciting series. This story of the invention of controlled human mechanized flight is astounding. It really is. I mean, it is so deeply stirring, and how it relates to our spiritual life, even what the church is needing right now in history, is profound. Okay, so I'm trying to, do a sales pitch for that as I go. So here's what I sometimes do, especially in the beginning of a series, is I'll sometimes have this inspiration that I want to bring more people into the series, and I have like a bonus message that just happens to fit really well for a Sunday sermon. So you guys are getting dragged into that. This is one of those dual ones. It'll be released in my sermon podcast, and then I think on Tuesday it'll pop out in my Daily Thunder podcast, because my Sunday Daily Thunder hasn't even released yet. Sorry, did I say Sunday? My Friday Daily Thunder is going to release tomorrow, so on Monday. So that confused everyone who's listening on a podcast. They're like, what in the world did he just say? The End of Orville Wright. So this is interesting because Orville Wright is a very key player in the Wilbur and Orville Wright duo. And so I'm going to set the stage here as we begin. And this is going to be very, very pertinent to our spiritual lives, okay? There's something that's really fun in this message. Even though I'm using the Wright brothers as sort of a muse for this, there is something spectacularly kingdom-minded that is going to emerge. So it's from my Spiritual Lessons from the Wright Brothers series, part 3, even though this is my Sunday sermon. It's a standalone, but it's part 3, the End of Orville Wright. So Orville is the guy on the left. The older brother is Wilbur, and Orville is the guy on the left. And so here we are in technically 1896 is what I'm talking about here. Orville Wright is going to come to his end. Now, the reason that can be a little confusing is if you know dates and you're familiar with American history, Orville Wright and Wilbur have not necessarily invented the plane quite yet. So for him to die in 1896, and by the way, this picture was taken probably about 10 years after that, is sort of confusing, don't you think? A little confounding that he would come to his end and meet his demise before he even invents the plane. And that's part of the beauty of the story. Here I'm going to set the stage with this quote from David McCullough. In the late summer of 1896, 25-year-old Orville was struck by the dreaded typhoid. Oh no. For days he lay in a delirium close to death, his fever at 105 degrees. The family doctor, Levi Spittler, said little could be done. Oh no, say it isn't so. Orville is passing away before we can even see what his life was supposed to be about? Oh no! Since Orville Wright was the first person to fly in a human-powered airplane in 1903, should we assume that something incredible happened to revive him? Yes. You should probably assume that. But the point of my story is that great things come out of difficulties. That oftentimes things have to come to an end. I shouldn't even say oftentimes. The most beautiful things first have to come to an end before they can truly come to that beautiful new beginning. The Christian life is all about a beautiful new beginning. It is. But for you to arrive at that beautiful new beginning, you had to come to an end. And until you come to that end, you actually can't discover the beautiful new beginning. Winky Pratney, a evangelist from New Zealand, once said it this way, that true life begins on the far side of the cross. It's like, oh, I want that true life. Could I have that true life, please? Well, the only way to get that true life is to go through the cross. And that's the same for all of us. God brings us through that cross, not just at the beginning of our Christian experience, but actually over and over again, he will bring us through that same pattern to increase life within us. He has to bring us through that death or dying process. The principle of endings, they are essential for new beginnings. Now, if you've ever studied how something will come to its end, life is instinctively designed to fight off death. It's very interesting, and someone does not die easily. So even if they are punctured full of bullet holes, they will fight and fight to stay alive. Life doesn't go without a fight. And so it's an interesting thing for us to recognize that for a new beginning to take place, we have to go through that process of letting go. And anytime you let go of your life, if even in small ways, let alone big ways, it is a fight. It is a wrestling match. And so if any of you have gone through that wrestling match, you could testify. Yeah, it's actually quite challenging to come to that place. This actually came from something Nathan Johnson said. I was supposed to talk with him about this, so I didn't say it incorrectly before. That was in my head, talk with Nathan, and then I forgot to. So now I might be talking with you while I'm on stage, Nathan. For a new shoot of an olive tree to grow, ... the old tree must first die. Is that accurate? The main one has to fall over and die, and then the new shoots can come forth. Genesis 22, 2-3, classic picture of this Moriah moment. In fact, that is one of the ways that I have sort of articulated it to my soul, is that God brings me through Moriah moments where Abraham has something very special in his life. Abraham's story is very interesting because he is going to be childless. Then he's going to be promised that he will have children, and his children will be as the sands of the seashore. But then there is still a period of time where he doesn't have it. So he's going to sort of take things into his own hands, classic, human. This is what we do. It's like, oh God, I see where you're going, so I'm going to manufacture a great solution for your plan. And that's Ishmael. It's a firstborn product. In other words, it's a product of Abraham's flesh instead of the working of the Holy Spirit. And so that isn't going to be able to stand before God. God is going to call him a wild donkey of a man. Isn't that the way that when we produce it out of our own strength? That's a pretty good description. A wild donkey of a decision, Eric. That isn't going to produce anything good. And so then Abraham is going to have a supernatural child, and his name is Isaac. And Isaac is the chief plan. I mean, this is how God is even articulated, that it's through Isaac that Abraham is going to have his children be as the sands of the seashore. So it's like clear. And so he loves this child, and God is going to then say, yeah, could you take that child, Isaac, the supernatural one, and could you go on a 3-day journey up to Moriah and sacrifice him for me? Okay, now that's not an easy thing to go through. And it's what we could call an ending or a death point that is going to be a trigger point for something even greater. We're actually going to see the working of Jesus and his cross in and through this picture in Genesis 22, 2-3. Then God said, take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey. Now, I've oftentimes talked about the fact that this story skips a little segment. And that is, he's being told maybe the previous afternoon or evening. But because it's the following morning that they're going to move forward. What happened that night? And whatever happened that night was possibly a sleepless night, was possibly involving multiple rolling over moments, trying to come up with another way. Is there a different way that this could be approached? God, please. And then in the end conclusion, it's like, yes, Lord. Don't you wish that our yes, Lord could be instant as opposed to the wrestling and turning over in bed at night type of a thing? Now, we don't see it in here, and it's possible that Abraham didn't have that. However, I think that's part of just what we all know instinctively, even through watching Jesus go to Gethsemane, that there is still a wrestling match. Even Jesus is going to be wondering, is there another way? He has a human side to him that is reasoning through that. But not my will, but thine. And this is a not my will, but thine sort of moment. And ironically, that mountain that God is going to show him, historically, this is understood to be Calvary, the very same place Jesus is going to die. So, quite profound that God is thinking this through all those years before and setting the stage for us to see the profundity. So, I'm going to go back to this one. I'm going to add one more statement to the Genesis 22 passage. God is asking Abraham to do something and come to the end. He has to agree with God, which means he has to lay down his Isaac. And so one of the things I want you to sort of tag in your soul is an Isaac. This doesn't have to be a bad thing. This is a good thing in your life. For instance, one of my Isaacs could be my marriage. It could be my family. It could be this ministry of Ellerslie. And for me to constantly hold these things, when I hold my marriage before God, I'm not saying, God, do you want me to be divorced? No. What I'm saying is, God, my wife belongs to you. And that's a hard thing. I don't know if you've ever had to go through these things. That was, Keith Green has a song that he used to sing, I pledge my head to heaven for the gospel. I pledge my wife, I pledge my children. It was basing it on one of these stories of the martyrs, where they say, and I will kill your wife unless you deny Christ. It's like, well, that's a tough one. Yeah, they know it's a tough one. The devil knows it's a tough one. Why do you think he's bringing it up? What are you going to choose, your wife or your God? You can't do that to a man. That's unfair, especially a guy who loves his wife and his kids. And yet, as a man, I need to always make sure that even the best things in my life are under God's leadership, that they belong to God. They're not mine, they're his. And so no matter what you have in your life, technically you're always ripe for an Isaac or an Abraham-Isaac moment, a Moriah moment, to say, okay, Lord, my wife is yours. My children, each one of them, yours. The things I love, the relationships I have, I love what I do, here at Ellerslie. I love this campus, but it's yours, Lord. And if you desire to take it, who am I to stand in the way? Okay, so now leading into Ellerslie. Now, I'm guessing that this was 2009. This could have been 2008, okay? It's somewhere in that zone, so sorry to even put a date on it to make it seem like I know exactly when this was. I remember it, and if I were to dig a little deeper and just sort of get into my journals, I could probably create the exact date, but that's totally beside the point. It really doesn't matter. I had been praying for this ministry for 17 years. The vision for it was before Leslie and I were in a relationship, and I actually read it before her family and my family. It was a burden that was burning a hole in my soul. And even that night, we prayed about it as families. It's amazing because those two families are going to be the founding of this whole thing. But that was 17 years before we had our first banquet night here. And so you talk about what's going to happen in those 17 years, and I'm going to constantly be coming back to this. Leslie and I are going to be traveling the world, and we're going to be speaking, and I'm going to constantly be feeling like, what is needed is this. This is where my passion is, and I had to constantly lay it down. Constantly, because that wasn't my assignment at that moment. But I had this burden, this vision, constantly putting it back in God's hands. Key moment, right before, somewhere around 2008, 2009, right before God is going to give the final push behind Ellerslie starting, I'm going to officially lay it down. And you could say, what were those other times not official? They were, but this was like, I actually came to the conclusion that all of that must have been for a different reason, that God was giving me this vision, giving me this burden, and he was going to redirect it now, that all of that was being leveraged into something else he was calling me to, and he was saying, thank you, Eric, for all your faithfulness towards this idea, because now I'm going to take all of that and I'm going to use it in a different way. And I submitted to that, and I came to the end of Ellerslie. It was all laid down. In fact, I actually did not expect to be doing this. And then right after I laid it down, God goes into this ministry. And so to come to your end is sometimes critical to actually discover the beginning. So this is this isn't a direct quote, but this is the concept. Here it is, Lord. 17 years of prayer, but all that prayer must have been for another purpose. I trust you. If you ask for something, you ought to receive the very thing you request. Out of the soil of death. Now, it's interesting because the students just heard, grain of wheat, which is, of course, the same principle. So God's hitting you on this point hard. Out of the soil of death. John 12, 24 through 25. Most assuredly, says Jesus, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain. He who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. It is interesting how we hold on to things tighter than we ought. They're good things. Isaac is a good thing. Abraham struggled with Ishmael, being rejected. And that's one of those things where like, Abraham, come on. Let go of the Ishmael vision, okay? God has something better. That's easier for us to see. But the Isaac one, that's tricky for us because that's God's gift to Abraham. It's a supernatural gift. It's a child of promise. And there are things in our life that are even good things that God still says, can you set it in my hands? Can you allow me to caretake for it? Can you allow me to lead you to Moriah with that? Well, God, you wouldn't do that, would you? And for us to let go instead of cling is one of the key attributes of success in our life. When we cling, we lose. When we let go, we gain. It's sort of backwards to our human thinking. So the many endings of Moses, if you were to think about just Moses' life, he's a great illustration for this. There's a lot of great illustrations in Scripture because this is just the kingdom pattern of coming to an end so that a new beginning can take place. I mean, you think about even the beginning of his life. If you've ever just done a deep dive on just that story of the times in which Moses is born, right when Pharaoh is declaring that every newborn child is going to be killed, and so all of the midwives are supposed to, kill every baby boy that is born, and somehow Moses is going to be spared out of this incredible onslaught. Moses is going to be spared, and he's being hidden. And for his mom to set him in this ark of bulrushes and to set him in the Nile and just let him float, that's a death, guys. That's a giving up into the care of God in a way that is hard for any of us as parents to comprehend. Now, when you grow up with the story and you see it in, videos or, whatever form it is, you sometimes lose the true human dynamic in that. You try and relate to it, but I mean, for any of us to actually do that and to say, God, this is your child. Now, that ending, if I could call that an ending, the ending of Moses, the giving up, because he's going to be eaten by some croc somewhere along the line, that's impossible for a child to somehow make it through this. And yet, God, I trust you. That is going to be a new beginning in Moses' life. And he's going to be raised in the courts of Pharaoh. It's an astounding story. It really is that we all just sort of, take for granted. It's like, yeah, that happened. Then he is going to rise up somewhere at the age of 40. Okay, that's what we know. He's competent. He's one of the most well-educated men in the world. According to Josephus, he was actually a mighty conqueror, like a military general. And he actually led the Egyptians to destroy the Ethiopians, which at the time was the most powerful nation, which is sort of hard for us to believe now that Ethiopia was a powerful nation, right? And that was Moses' great victory, and he was known for that as a mighty conqueror. Isn't that just odd to ponder? And so just imagine, this is at least my input into the story, is that Moses at some point is going to begin to recognize his heritage. He's Hebrew, and he's going to see the treatment of the Hebrews, and he is going to maybe rise up with a desire to deliver them. And so when he kills the Egyptian and buries him, he's going to begin to realize that he's fallen into the foul opinion of the Egyptians. And so he's going to flee to the wilderness. Now, that's a death. I want you to ponder what that means for him to leave and to actually exit his incredibly princely state, his power position in the world. He had something going for him, guys, and he is going to deliberately choose to lay that down and to go into a different life. And of course, all of us would agree it was a good decision, because what's going to happen inside of him during those 40 years in the wilderness is going to make him who we know him to be in history. He is going to be forged in and through that wilderness season where he's a shepherd, where he's married and he has kids. There's a part of him that is developing that he didn't have when he was ready to save his people. I'm a mighty conqueror. You could imagine. He's like, God, I'm ready. You're not ready, Moses. You see, when God walks us through an ending and we lay down a season of strength, a season of possibility, and we say, God, it belongs to you. God always has a greater plan. We can't always see it, which makes it extremely difficult to walk through those doorways. But Moses is going to be built into a mighty leader by leading sheep. Yeah, it's the same pattern David had, ironically. Jesus is going to call himself the Good Shepherd. You see, there's something about that there's something about the shepherd as the training ground that actually makes for a great leader. So that's the burning bush moment. 40 years later, and Moses is going to encounter a burning bush, and it's a death point to his life because he has something good going on here. You know, he's married, he has children, it's like, hey, can't we just keep this going? Instead, God is going to leverage all of this season and bring it to an end. And he's going to say, now you're ready. Now you're ready to deliver your people. And what does Moses say? I can't do that. Moses now has no confidence in himself. Isn't that an ironic thing? The mighty conqueror of the Ethiopians has no confidence. It's because he was being readied for something greater. And anyone who has confidence in their own ability is not ready to do God's business. You have to be emptied of confidence in yourself so that you have only confidence in God's ability. And so that's going to be a death to one season of his life and an entry into another. Now, I skip not that far into the future with the Red Sea incident, okay? So he is going to enter into a new season. Just imagine what he gave up. He gave up this nice, quiet life in the wilderness, being a shepherd. Everything seemed so pleasant, to suddenly being a leader of a nation, or a nation soon to be, a people that were enslaved, that weren't too excited about him leading them, by the way. So he traded out ease for extreme difficulty. And then that extreme difficulty is going to culminate at the Red Sea. God's going to work 10 miracles, these 10 plagues. God is going to supernaturally deliver. We have, the first Passover night. I mean, amazing things are happening. They're going to plunder the Egyptians of the gold. Everything is looking pretty good. And then they're getting away. A whole nation of people getting away from the most powerful nation on earth. And they're going to run into an obstacle. And this is a dying moment. This is an ending. You have a Red Sea backing you up. You have mountains on either side. You have the most powerful military in the world at that time, the Egyptians, and they are mad. And Moses has to come to another end, where in this end, as he trusts his God and says, God brought us here, though. He's learned this, that God, when God is in control, God works amazing things. And so even though Moses has allowed God to bring him to yet another end, what we're going to see is a whole new beginning. In fact, you could say the nation of Israel is forged out of this exact ending. When that Red Sea parts and that people group goes across and it swallows up the enemy and frees the Israelites, you have the beginnings of a nation known as Israel. It's the first time they've ever been able to have their own governmental system. They are going to rise into a powerhouse where all the nations around are going to tremble. And it comes out of this death moment. And I'm going to skip to the very end of his life, which is another 40 years after this, and that's the top of Mount Pisgah. Oh, what an exciting place to be. This is where Moses dies. And I'm going to call that an ending. It's pretty obvious why it is. However, it's not the ending. Just like all the others, it's actually the stage that sets even something greater, and I'm going to hold that little piece of data back. So my long history of Orville-ish deaths. So I started with, the ending of Orville Wright, who's a key character in our story when we're talking about the Wright brothers. I mean, if this guy passes away in 1896, which for all practical purposes he should have, If he does, I don't know where we're at as far as the discovery of flight. I mean, it's a very interesting question. You could put a big question mark over it. I don't have the answer to that. But it is interesting to realize that this man came to an end. And ironically, as I dig just a little deeper into that story, you'll recognize that that end of Orville is what began everything we know about Wilbur and Orville Wright. But it had to come through an ending. So my long history of Orville-ish sorts of deaths. In other words, the sort of death where Eric announces at the beginning saying, yeah, Orville died. And all of you are like, what? How could that have happened? No, actually he didn't. That's our storyline as Christians. In other words, yeah, Eric had to come to his end. He came to his end? Yeah, so he could have a new beginning in his life. In other words, it's all part of my story. End, beginning, end, beginning, end, beginning. And I should have even said something like this, end, beginning, end, beginning. And beginning. Now, if you're getting that via podcast, you have no idea what I just did. That was sort of showing that with the constant growth, with an end comes an increase in life. With an end comes a greater increase in life. With another end comes even a greater increase in life. So I'm going to go through 11 of these moments in my life. I'll try and do it very quickly. And why I picked these 11 and why I picked 11, maybe it's in honor of Josiah Kinnebrew's 11th birthday. That was why I did it, right there. So Orville-ish Death number 1, the rollover accident with Bob. So Bob Barr, my college roommate, just happened to swing into town on Friday. So, the students got to at least see him from a distance. And this happened in 1990, December. Key moment in my life. God was working in my life in a very profound way. And I had been giving things over to him, little mini deaths along the way. And I remember that was the year I gave up future relationships, that I'm willing to be single. It happened before this. I mean, all of this is happening in this time period, and those are hard things to come to. Talk about a wrestling match. It's like, okay, I could say it with my mouth, but God would know I don't mean it. Have you ever had that? It's like, oh, I'm willing to be single. Yeah, right. And then, on the side, it's like, I got God. I told him this, but he doesn't really know that I really am, planning to get married. That isn't how God works, and we know it. You can't con God. So, and I was very aware of that. It's like, okay, if I'm going to say this, I need to mean it, which means I need to be willing to be single. Oh, wow, that's a tough one. And I had just gone through that. I was now giving up. I'd never realized that I'd never given my future to God, which included I was studying to be a doctor. That was what I was doing. Bob was in the same program with me. We were roommates together. We're both double majors in biology and chemistry. And God is asking for my future. Eric, are you willing to have you do something else? Well, God, this is what I've been working hard on. Well, Eric, are you willing to set it in my hands? Well, what does that mean? What if you don't know? It's like, oh, wow, this is hard. Okay, so I had just been at that place of giving my future to the Lord. And I said, God, what do you want with me? And here's what I said. Show me in your own special way what you want me to do. That night, my mom calls. And she says, Eric, I just got back from Texas, and I'm thinking that you should look into the missionary training program down in Texas. Well, I'll go into a deeper version of this, but I had no interest in doing that. And yet I had just prayed that prayer, and it really bothered me that my mom called and she was saying this. And so her very ending statement was, will you at least pray about it? How am I supposed to say no to that? Yes. I got off the phone, and my other roommate was like, who is that? This is my mom. What did she say? She was just talking about something. About what? It was about a missionary school down in Texas. What sort of missionary school? Well, it's just like a place you go and you focus on Jesus for like a few months. Really? That sounds amazing. Like, really? And he's like, I'll go with you. I'm like, really? You'll go with me? He never did go with me. So right after this conversation, I'm driving home with Bob, which we were discussing this story. It's probably why it's in my head, but we were discussing it because it's a pretty crucial moment for both of us in our life. And we were in the middle of Wyoming, middle of nowhere, in a snowstorm. We shouldn't have been driving in the first place, but we're college students, and we just wanted to get home to home cooking. It's like, let's just get home. And we roll over. We went flying off the interstate, going 75 miles an hour in a blizzard. We rolled down a hill. The side of the truck that I was on was crushed. I didn't even have my seatbelt on. I just switched drivers. I was trying to get comfortable in my seat before I strapped it. And the whole side is crushed down to probably like, it would be down to like mid-chest level. And so I don't remember if it was a policeman. I don't remember who it was that came over and was looking at the damage. We're in the middle of this blizzard out there. And the guy says, "Who was sitting here? Who was sitting here?" I raised my hand. He goes, "You should be dead." Okay. But for me, this was an ending. I had something good going in my life, guys. People were impressed with me, what I was choosing to do. Even when I said it, you're like, "Oh, I esteem that. That sounds important." I was doing something that sounded important to people. I could explain myself. Have you ever had that where you're just wanting to have an answer when people say, "What do you do in your life?" And you have this answer and they're like, "Oh, that's important." That's what I had. My relatives were impressed. They wanted the younger cousins to grow up to be like me. And if I just stayed doing this, everything would be fine. Until this moment. And this was an ending where I recognized my life is not my own. God was speaking that to me. Okay. This life, this college life that I really want to cling to, I give it up. So, Orville-ish Death number 2. So I leave college, this is like in 1991, and I go on the mission field for a whole season of my life. And I come back, and I had already transferred. See, at Whitworth, where I was up in Washington, you have to, the way their pre-med program worked is you had like these prerequisites that, the class would be offered once every 2 years. So you have to get in this system, and once you get out of it, it really messes you up. And they were even telling me that when I was leaving. It's like, "God, have you thought this through?" And so I recognized to get back into Whitworth was actually problematic. It's going to be like an extra, year of school for me there. Very expensive too. And so I got accepted into Baylor University. And so it's like, okay, they have a good pre-med program, good, placement rate into med schools. I'm going to be well off here. And I just didn't feel comfortable with it. Like after I'm done, it's just like, God, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with my life. I was totally messed up, guys. I had a plan. And now I'm like swimming. And I remember I was back at my parents' house, kneeling by a couch. My face was planted into the cushions of it. I felt an acute sense of loneliness. We call it FOMO now. I didn't have a word for it then. All my friends are laughing and having fun and doing something with their life in college. What am I doing? I'm like weird now. I focused on Jesus. I gave my life to Christ. And now how do I explain this to anyone? I had no answer. What are you doing in life, Eric? The guy across the street when I came home confronted my parents and said, "Your son should be doing something. He shouldn't just be living at home right now." I'd been there for like 2 months in between things. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I'm not planning on staying with my parents. I don't know what you think I am, but I'm going to make something of myself. I had to deal with the neighbor thinking I was just like, loafing around in my parents' house. How humiliating is that? I'm not a loafer. So this is critical for me. It's a death point where I actually came to the place at that couch where I said, I give up this future, where I go to college and I am normal. I'm willing to not be normal, Lord. Orville-ish Death number 3, the other girl moment. Well, this is a tough one. I went over to Bulgaria, and I had this good friend over there that was the other girl, and it's not Leslie, in other words. And I was not attracted to the other girl. She's a great girl. We should say lady now. She's probably older than I am, and I'm 54. So, but I haven't seen her in years, so she's still a young woman in my mind. But I wasn't necessarily interested in her. She was interested in me, and when we got back from overseas, because she wasn't even in my team, she was just over there at the same time in Bulgaria, and she was living in Washington State. She got in touch with my mom, and they developed this close friendship, and my mom was very interested in a potential relationship here. You know how hard this was for me, guys? Because I had a vision for what marriage was supposed to be. And I had this idea that I was going to be very attracted to my wife. and I was going to delight to be married to her. And this is actually a very odd and weird story in my life. But when my mom's like, Eric, are you willing to allow God to do what he wants in this area of your life? And I'm thinking, no. So I came to an end, guys, and I actually said, God, I don't know how you do these things. And maybe I'm not supposed to be attracted. Maybe that's just a cultural thing. I don't know. But I give it up. You know, it's interesting because, letting go of my definition of happiness. I didn't marry the other girl. Praise God. And what God did bring into my life is so beyond even what I could have thought or imagined. I mean, we wrote books about it. I traveled around the world bragging about it. That's how good it was, but it came out of a soil of death in my life where I let it go. When you cling to it, you can never see that new beginning in what God desires. Orville-ish Death number 4, standing up in class and acknowledging my sin. So I shared this on Friday, where I had 4 lies that I had told, and I had to stand up in front of my missionary school and I didn't announce them, I confessed them to the 4 guys that I had lied to. And I felt about, this big, and if you're getting this via podcast, that's about, a quarter of an inch. And it was humiliated, it was. And yet what I discovered in and through that death of coming to the end of myself and risking public ridicule, risking rejection from my friends by being honest is one of the key moments of my life. When I came to the end and I said, God, I'm willing to look like a fool for you, I discovered that isn't how the church responds. That actually it strengthened me and strengthened my relationships and strengthened the trust in those relationships when I was willing to let go of the good opinion of friends to stand for Jesus. Orville-ish Death number 5, saying yes to speaking in Monroe, Louisiana, 1992. I had some weird views in my missionary group. I actually was waiting for my future spouse and wasn't going to manipulate circumstances. This was God's territory. And someone caught wind of that. And I remember they asked me when we're on the bus, they're all having this conversation, this big group of young people driving down the interstate. And they were all talking about something. I'm just staying out of it. I'm not about to say my opinion because that's just going to get me in trouble. You learn somewhere along the line, it's better just to stay quiet sometimes, especially when you have the contrary or the weird view on things. And so someone said, Eric Ludy, has some thoughts on this or something like that. And so someone says, what do you say about this, Ludy? It was some question about my future wife. It's like, look, I'm thinking, this is dangerous territory. I'm just waiting for my wife. God knows this territory, and I love her even now. I said something about loving my future spouse even before I met her. And this other leader in the group was like, that is totally ridiculous. I think that is totally bogus. That's not how it works. I'm like, okay, each to his own. You can have your opinion. I'm going to have mine. She didn't let it go. She was upset about that. And everyone's like intrigued by what I had to say. And I didn't even want to talk about it. And so we get to this Monroe, Louisiana venue, and it's this huge youth gathering. So it's like 700, 800 youth in Monroe, Louisiana. And they wanted to have something on purity. Someone was speaking on purity. And they didn't have a speaker. And so they come to our team and said, do you have anyone on your team who could say some things about purity? And then someone in the crowd goes, Eric Ludy has things to say on that. And so the leadership team comes to me and says, Eric, we want you to get up there and say some things about purity. And inside, I even knew that I was supposed to when they said that. Have you ever had that? And then on the outside, I'm like, no way am I about to do that. That's like willingly choosing a cross, saying, I'd like to be crucified on that one. Why would you do that? I knew my youth culture at the time. I knew how opposite my viewpoints were. You got to be kidding me. And I'm like, okay. And I remember even sitting there awaiting my doom. As I was waiting, they mispronounced my name even when they introduced me, everything about the situation. I was arguing with God, like, God, give me something else to say. Give me something else to say. Because I knew what I was supposed to say. Give me something else to say. Give me something else to say. This is my death right here, the ending of Eric Ludy. Okay. I'm willing to say what you want me to say. And it doesn't matter what they think. I have this instinct as a public communicator. I know what my audience is feeling and thinking. It's not a great attribute, not a great trait, and there's many times I wish I didn't have this. But I know my audience. And I've known many times throughout the years when people are offended. Do I just shut up? Do I just keep my mouth shut? And that's part of the great challenge is I want to be liked. I was homecoming king in high school and in college. I want to be liked. Please like me. And then I come to the cross and I instinctively now have this notion. I understand that when I follow Christ, I am not going to always be a pleasing aroma to the world around me. This is one of those moments. I get up and I share something which you would probably all find very basic and simple. Not one person made a noise when I was talking. It was that random cough that you would hear in the crowd. And I said something very simple. I said, we've all been told about physical purity and, abstaining till we get married. And I just really feel God wants us to recognize that it's actually a spiritual purity that he's after. It's how we're thinking. It's what we're feeling in our heart, that he wants to touch us there, and he wants us to be pure on the inside. It wasn't that weird, but it was weird then. And everyone was silent. I even got done and I went down. No one clapped. Everyone's just sort of like, you heard like this type of a thing. And I got down. The guy follows me out on the stage, some leader, and he goes, "Well, I'm not here to preach holiness." I felt, okay, how big was I in the other story? Maybe a little smaller than that. It was one of the most humiliating moments of my life in front of everyone, in front of my whole team. It's like total rejection. I was confronted by team leaders after that asking me to seek forgiveness for bringing condemnation after I spoke. And I said I would not do that because I spoke everything I did in love. And I love everyone here. And because I'm saying things that make you feel uncomfortable, I don't think that's condemnation. That's how the devil will use it. This is called conviction. There's a difference between the two. This is like the beginnings of something. Out of this death is going to grow, well, my ministry. But it came out of a death. Letting go of my need to be approved by the crowd. Orville-ish Death number 6, the kitchen table on my honeymoon. So I have a wonderful family tree. I really do. And a lot of high achievers, a lot of educated people, highly successful people. And when you're growing up and you have these uncles that are just like state-of-the-art uncles, I mean, they're great guys. I want their approval. And I remember when I started making some of these decisions, I felt the scowl of disapproval in the family ranks. And I remember on my honeymoon dealing with this. There's Leslie, and I'm just trying to, have the stiff upper lip. And I felt that I had disappointed a whole sector of my life. And for whatever reason, because of certain factors of where we were for our honeymoon, it literally bubbled to the surface. And it's like, I don't know why I care about it. I don't know why I want them to approve me. Why does this matter? It shouldn't matter. And I was like crying at the table. This is on my honeymoon. I'm supposed to be this strong, gallant man, and I'm like struggling. And I remember it was a key death point. All right, I'm willing to live my life and give up the good approval of my relatives. Oh, that's a hard one, guys. Orville-ish Death number 7. That spot in Rich and Janet's neighborhood, that's Leslie's parents, where we asked the question, what if God was wanting us to, do this full time? This one guy had come up to us. We'd had a book that we'd released, and it was like traveling around the world. We couldn't figure out why everyone wanted to read this thing. That's a whole story in and of itself. But then this one guy that was the publisher said, that you guys could go into full-time ministry for like 2 years and just do this and nothing else. Well, nothing sounded worse than that, okay? We still had plans, okay? I was going to go back to med school. That's the reason we moved back to Colorado. Leslie was going to go into nursing. We had a plan, okay? Don't mess with our plan, man. And this is going to be a death. Because for us, it's funny, after I died to all these good opinions of the world, I felt like God was still leading me back into something that could sort of wipe some of the egg off my face. It's like, this is going to be great. I could be credible again. Instead, this thought comes in. would we be willing, this is the question, would we be willing to actually do this full time? And I asked Leslie, this one spot, I even drove by it the other day. I was showing my kids and I said, this is the spot. And they were like, they didn't know what spot I was talking about. If Leslie had been there, she knows the spot. I'm turning a corner and I said, what do you think about like doing this full time? She goes, no way. And I nodded. That was both, but both of us are going to come to that place of saying, okay, that's probably not the right response. Okay, Lord. It was a death. And that death is going to lead to this ministry. So letting go of a credible career, money, reputation, status. That's what it meant for us. A credible career. Do you know that I was asked to speak at an event and the marketing data for it, this is only a couple years after this, which I wasn't too excited about this, right? I'm fighting it the whole way, tooth and nail. And I was described, get this, for a life description of what I do professionally. A chastity expert. How's that going to go over at the reunion, the high school reunion with your public school buds? It's like, Eric, what did you grow up to be? Well, I became a chastity expert. I'm the best one out there. That is terrible, guys. Orville-ish Death number 8, losing scout. Now, I'm skipping tons of things, but when we had we had a miscarriage in 2008. Very difficult thing, and I'm going to say letting go of loved ones. Recognizing that all things need to be in God's hands and that when you release them into God's hands, He works miracles. He brings beauty out of ash. Harper is going to come into our family because of this. This situation is going to sensitize us to the value of the unborn. And almost exactly at the due date of Scout, or the child we called Scout, Harper is going to come home from Korea. And God is going to bring something beautiful, beauty out of ash in our life, because we were willing to let go instead of argue and hold on. Orville-ish Death number 9, moving to Nicaragua. You guys didn't know that we moved to Nicaragua, did you? It's because we never did. We came to a spot, look at the dates, 2008. 2009 is when we're going to have all of this open up. Right before all this, Leslie and I are going to be like, are we willing? Now, all of our skill sets are in the English language. We are very competent in the English language, abnormally so. And so to go to Nicaragua, this was such an interesting test for my soul because, I took Spanish in high school, but I'm pathetic at Spanish. I'm really good at English. God, let me give you some advice. Use me in an English-speaking country, all right? I'm just giving you some good advice. I don't know what it's like up there in heaven, but maybe some things get skewed and you just think that all nations speak the same language. But if I go there, I can't leverage my strength. You know what God was asking me for? My strength. And so for us to say that we were willing to move to Nicaragua, which at a certain point we were going to sell every single thing, we were going to Nicaragua, guys. We were ready. We died. In fact, we were actually excited. This is one of the funniest things. It's like, I'm excited to go. And then God, in the midst of that, sort of like raising the knife over Isaac, He says, I actually don't want you to go to Nicaragua. And that's when Ellerslie is going to begin. That's actually what's happening right before it. So letting go of that sense of competence. Orville-ish Death number 10, the end of the first semester of Ellerslie. So the first semester of Ellerslie was one wild ride. There's a few of you in here that were actually there and were very intimately a part of that first semester. What an incredible experience. But because of certain things that happened right before the start of the first semester, I ended up with a workload and a teaching workload that was unhuman. It's impossible to pull off. And my body acknowledged that at the end because it totally collapsed. And so I was laying in bed. I don't know how many weeks that was. We were talking about it just the other day. Was it a couple weeks, 3 weeks? And I actually had to realize that maybe this was the end of my life, that maybe that was my magnum opus. And I have one semester of Ellerslie. Believe me, I was arguing with God about this. It's like, come on, that's sort of pathetic for a magnum opus. If I knew that was my magnum opus, I would have shouted a little louder maybe. I'm done. I'm done. And even though I was still asking God that I'm not done, but I had to actually release my own life, which is a weird thing to say. I had to let go of my wife and kids and trust that God was going to care for them. It's like, God, if you wanted to take me, would I say yes? Okay, now I'm not saying that that's what God's doing today in all of our lives, but that's what he walked me through. God, am I willing to let go of even my life and trust you that you can bring beauty out of even that? Even though in my mind I'm thinking, now how could that be beautiful? Even out of that. So letting go of life, my future, my marriage, my kids, everything. By the way, I did recover, just in case you're wondering. And Orville-ish Death, number 11. Now, I've skipped a lot. This is between 2016 and 2020. It was a long death. This is when I say that I went from understanding suffering to long suffering. 48 months, and Sandy got to suffer this with me because she was my right hand during this. But this is when we were short on money for various reasons, which are a whole story in and of itself, for 4 straight years, 48 months. And in those 48 months, this is just a guess, but it was somewhere around 38, 39 of those 48 months, coming into the end of the month, we did not have money for payroll at the beginning of the next month. And God supernaturally supplied every single time. But you know how hard that is to walk through? So many months in a row, so many, where it's just like, Lord, please. And see, what was I holding on to? This is a death. And the reason I call it a death is it was control. It was comfort. There was nothing comfortable about this. If I just had a normal career, if I didn't have this crazy campus, if I didn't, all these different things that my flesh is starting to lash out at, saying this discomfort is coming from, and then I'm looking for a culprit. Instead of saying, looking at God, and God says, from me, because I love you. Could you let go of your comfort? Could you let go of that control? I don't have control. I gave that up a long time ago. Why am I holding on to it so tightly then? Okay, Lord, I'm willing to come to my end. Now, this is a rock skimming along the surface of Eric's life. I'm just saying, this is my life. What came out of that was the miracle of 2020, guys, and I'm not going to go into it, but it's extraordinary. It really is. How God has cared for not just me, not just my wife, not just my kids, not just my team here at Ellerslie, not just this church, this ministry. God has a plan. The question is, are we willing to walk in agreement? Because he's going to constantly lead us to these places where he's like, you're holding on. Would you come to your end? So I'm going to talk about some ends that are rather profound in this Wright brothers series. The end of Otto Lilienthal, 1896. He was known as the Flying Man. So this is the great inspiration of the Wright brothers right here. So don't you guys love that guy already just with that painting? So over 2,000 flights and over 12 different gliders, Lilienthal, also known as the Flying Man, had mastered the air unlike any other in history. But on August 9th, 1896, Lilienthal fell from 50 feet and was killed in the fall. Oh no, we just got to know him and he's already passed away. So this is his purported final words of the aviation pioneer. This is what he said as he went up for his final flight. Sacrifices must be made. It's a pretty profound statement in light of what we're talking about. Yep. If this whole agenda of God is going to move forward in this life, then each of us needs to recognize sacrifices are going to be made. Are we going to participate in that, or are we going to hold on? We're going to hold on to our things, our special stuff in life, or are we willing to make sacrifices? For them, yeah, to learn flight isn't the greatest, most noble thing in all the universe, but it's symbolic in this story. There's some pictures of Otto Lilienthal and his glider. The only thing they could produce up to this point, and this was the greatest flying contraption that existed, was Otto Lilienthal's glider at this point. So I'm going to call this the resurrection of the Flying Man. When Otto Lilienthal came to his end, he had a vision and he was passionate about it, guys. It was a big deal. And out of this horrible death arose not just one, but 2 flying men. It was Otto Lilienthal's death that actually led to the Wright brothers' awakening to flight. So David McCullough said it this way: it was a month before Orville could sit up in bed, another 2 weeks before he could get out of bed. And during this time, Wilbur had begun reading about the German glider enthusiast Otto Lilienthal, who had recently been killed in an accident. And he read aloud to Orville. So there's Orville coming to his end, giving up his life, all of his dreams, and so is Wilbur. They worked together in a bike shop. I mean, this was like their life. This is their livelihood. And both of them are sort of coming to that end, which is a new beginning. And in this time, who dies but Otto Lilienthal? And it's all over the news. And Wilbur's fascinated because these two have always had an interest in flight. But they'd sort of given it up because it's impractical. What are we going to do with our life? We need to make bicycles, not fly. And that death is going to awaken Wilbur, while Orville is dying, to actually gather everything he can find on flight. And then he starts reading it to Orville as Orville's laying there in bed dying. David McCullough says it this way: news of Lilienthal's death, Wilbur later wrote, aroused in him as nothing had an interest that had remained passive from childhood. Lilienthal's conclusions on flight. Gas balloons have nothing in common with birds. I know that's profound to all of you. The secret of the art of flight is to be found in the arched or vaulted wings of birds by which they could ride the wind. What we are seeking is the means of free motion in the air in any direction, and only by flying oneself could one achieve proper insight into all that is involved in the art of flight. And then my favorite, which I'm going to have an entire message on, it's one of the most profound statements. We must get on intimate terms with the wind. Oh boy, that one's just baiting us to grab a hold of it, isn't it? Talk about a spiritual principle. David McCullough says it this way: Otto Lilienthal was a squarely built figure with red hair and a beard who dressed for his flights in knickers with heavily padded knees. Lilienthal would position himself on a steep slope, the wings held above his head. As one American eyewitness described the scene, he stood like an athlete, waiting for the starting pistol. Then he would run down the slope and into the wind, hanging on as the wind lifted him from the ground. He would swing his body and legs this way or that as his means of balancing and steering, glide as far as possible, and land on his feet. Here's a famous Otto Lilienthal quote: "It must not remain our desire only to acquire the art of the bird. It is our duty not to rest until we have attained a perfect scientific conception of the problem of flight." 2 months of typhoid equaled a new beginning. If any of you have the privilege of having typhoid in your life, it is the soil in which God wants to work a miracle. When you have those difficulties that you wish you didn't have, if you would just embrace this ending of this particular season, this letting go season, and allow God to work a miracle in and through it. Wilbur began gathering everything he could find on the subject of flight. So this is a quote that they're going to read, that Wilbur is going to read to Orville while he's laying in bed. It's sort of fun to actually have this quote because they are going to repeat it throughout their life together. This is like one of their inspirational quotes. How frequently has the question been raised whether man must always continue to envy the bird and the insect their wings, whether he too may not one day travel through the air as he now sails across the ocean. Authorities in science have declared at different periods as a result of lengthy calculations that this is a chimerical dream. But how many intentions have we seen realized which have been pronounced impossible? So at that point in history, it was impossible to fly. These two boys, out of the death of Otto Lilienthal, out of the death of Orville, are going to rise up, and there's going to be now two flying men that are going to take on that vision, and they're going to do something that Lilienthal couldn't do. Taking God by the hand. So right now, we're all in a situation where God is desiring to lead us. And after a message like this, you're not exactly sure if you want to take his hand or not. He's like, do you want to come with me? We're like, where are you taking me? Isn't it interesting that we want to know where he's taking us before we take his hand? Will you take my hand? And letting him lead us to gulp our death. Deuteronomy 32. Then the Lord spoke to Moses that very same day, saying, "Go up to this mountain of the Abiram, Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, across from Jericho. View the land of Canaan." And then I'm combining this statement from the top of Mount Pisgah, because it's not in this exact statement, but it's said in the next one, "which I give to the children of Israel as a possession, and die on the mountain which you ascend." Come with me, come to the mountain and die. It's like, well, what a great invitation. Boy, is that a symbol of the cross right there. Come to Calvary and die. So and die on the mountain which you ascend. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there. Wow. But God, I have so much living still to do. Why do I need to come to my end? I'm just getting going. Moses had so much going for him. Why would I leave this life? Because I have a greater life for you, Moses. But God, I have this nice shepherding gig here in the wilderness. Why would I leave that? Because I have something greater for you, Moses. But God, you can just imagine this end argument. But God, I'm still strong, energetic, even though he's 120 years old. I could still lead. Could you let me go into the land of promise, please? It's not a bad request. Moses, I have something greater. You see, Moses is symbolic of the law, and the law can't take in the people of Israel into the promised land. It's the second man, Yeshua, Joshua, the same name as Jesus, that leads the people in. It is actually beauty that's going to come out of this ash. But God, I have so much living to do. Now listen to this. This is profound. And the Lord buried him, speaking of Moses, in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his grave to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor his natural vigor diminished. Why would you take him? Well, that's a good question I've asked many times in my life. God, I got something good going here. Why would you ask for that? And yet God is going to do something even greater. I know some of us feel bad for Moses. We're like, the guy got gypped. He's just doing what God's asking him. And then he gets, hindered from going into the land of promise because the guy has a bunch of idiots around him. God is not just punishing Moses. God is doing something in and through the death of Moses that is to Moses' advantage. Paul says it that way too. To live is Christ, but to die is gain. It is not a disadvantage to be invited to your death. We need to remember that. Do you trust your God, who is in fact the resurrection and the life? So when you're willing to come to your death, you know that he's the resurrection. There is always something greater that comes out of the soil of God leading you to your death. Does he not do all things well? Ephesians 3:20, now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us. Whatever you are thinking at this place of relinquishment of death, what God is going to do is so far beyond anything you could think or imagine. That's the ways of the King. And let's be finishing right about here. Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. Not another high mountain being led by the Lord. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, this is strange, guys, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with them. Guess who was there, guys? Front row seats in history. You guys see it, don't you? Moses. Moses gave up his life, and he trusted God. And you're thinking, the poor guy didn't even get to come into the promised land. No, he did. He did. He made it. He made it. And he had the ultimate seat of the most amazing occasion in history, where even in the midst of this darkness, this world that is rejecting the Christ, he gets to see everything that he foretold. Everything the Bible that he started writing is going to lead to. He gets to witness it, front row seat. Don't feel bad for Moses. Moses trusted his God, and God led him to endings which were new beginnings. And ironically, even after we die, it's simply just another great new beginning. And that is the mindset of the believer. This is the kingdom pattern. Listen to this, guys. This is how we finish. Guys, he's not here. I thought he died. Oh, wait a minute. I thought there was a death here. There was the ending of Christ. He is not here, for he is risen. That is the Christian life in a nutshell right there. God leads you to your death. He leads you to an ending. Well, that isn't the actual end. That's just a new beginning. We are risen in Christ at every ending that we come to. Lord Jesus, we celebrate that fact. We say thank you for your ways, which are higher than ours. Thank you for bringing us to our ends. And I pray, Lord Jesus, that we would receive that. We would take you by the hand and we would follow you up the mountain today, just as Moses did. And we would trust you that as you bring us to our death, Lord, you are doing something grand in our life. We trust your ways are higher than our ways. We love you so much, Lord. It's in the precious name we pray. Amen.